Hello everybody and welcome to another personal games of mine. This video is actually going to focus on a tournament that I played over the weekend. And here you're going to see the first three of the 5 games that I played. I'll be doing the last 2 games in a follow-up video to this one. So you're getting 3 for the price of 1. Fantastic. Better than most supermarket deals. So the first game of the tournament, this was a under 2200 FIDE. But it still has very strong players who are rather underrated. And the first game was against Ben Simpson, who is I think about 1880 FIDE, but can often play at a much higher level than that. So I was white, and I started with c4. Knight f6, g3, and here g6 was played. So after bishop g2 and bishop g7, I play the thematic knight c3. So I'm just quietly playing the English and sort of doing the main idea, which is controlling the d5 square. So knight c3 is almost always played in the English, so I may as well play it now. And after black castles, this is what I consider to be the most challenging move order in the English, because black's keeping the pawn structure quite fluid and flexible. So we don't yet know how black is going to set up the pawns in the centre. However, according to, I think it's Marine, who wrote 3 books on the English, white should just lunge into the centre and also keep it in an English. Don't transpose into a mainline King's Indian. So e4, controlling d5 even more now. So again, d6. So d6 is almost always played. And now black is again keeping me guessing as to whether he's going to play c5 or e5. One of them has to be played, really. I can't see a scenario where black is doing well with only moving these 2 pawns. I'll gain too much space in the centre that way. So I play the main move, which has been allowed by my move to e4, knight g e2, and c5. So this is what I consider to be the most challenging setup from black. c5 controls d4, of course, and I think it's a little better than e5 because it doesn't block in the g7 bishop. And also it does somewhat prevent me playing b4, which is a very sort of known theme in the English, very sort of mainline idea where white tries to expand on the queen side. So c5 is a very good move, and I don't want to castle just yet. I want to establish more control of the centre. So I play d3. Again, if I play d4, we're just transposing into a Maroczy-bind Sicilian, which I don't know as well as I do the English. So that's a sort of psychological point. d4, nothing wrong with it, but I just don't like playing those positions. Knight c6. And now he could be planning knight d4, so I have to consider knight d4. But I can't really play d4 now because I'll have just wasted a tempo. So I play rook b1 with the idea that if knight d4, I have b4, which could be a very interesting setup. So he keeps the knight on c6 and plays knight e8. Now, this looks like a very strange move because if black were trying to play f5, normally knight h5 would be played because it's more active. So f5 isn't really the main idea. Can you see what black is planning with knight e8? Well, notice that I cannot play d4 now, even if I wanted to, because he has a bishop on g7 that's just been released from its prison, the knight on c6 and the pawn on c5, all controlling d4. So he has 3 pieces on it. I need 3 pieces on d4 in order to play it, and I only have the knight and the queen. So with that, he's trying to prevent me playing d4 forever. So if I were to just routinely, if I were to routinely castle, then he shuts out my break forever with knight c7, and then the knight's coming to e6, and I cannot stop it. So if I do desperately try and break with bishop e3 now, knight e6, then yeah, I can't break. So a possible line, which is very bad for white, is trying to play knight d5, then black can come into d4. And one of the main themes in the English is that white wants to control the light squares and often put a knight on d5. And with the Vlcek structure, black will try and do the same, put a knight on d4. But here, black has all his pieces fantastically controlling d4, and I've sacrificed control of that square with my pawn structure. None of my pawns can protect or attack, control d4, but his can. So, whoops, with my next move, I could just take the knights off, but then I'm surrendering control of space. So if I try and break with b4 now, pawn b4, I'll have a pawn, a rook, and a knight all controlling b4. So that looks nice, but I think he could possibly prevent it with a5, because if I try and break, he can take, pawn takes, and then play e6. And now my knight will have to get out of the way. So that won't be very pleasant for me. So white's position there is absolutely terrible, and black has succeeded in gaining lots of space. So going back, that's why I don't routinely castle. I play bishop e3 first. And again, knight d4 is a consideration, but then I could just take, and he'll have to block up the good square he has with the pawn, and then white doesn't really have many problems. So he plays knight c7, and many players now would try and play a3 or f4, breaking in on the wing of the board. So a3, b4 is usually seen in this sort of position with this sort of Benoni setup that black has adopted. But what I do is I break in the center, because otherwise I am going to get squashed. So d4, and the reason I don't consider this bad, because earlier I said I'd waste a tempo by playing d4 in 2 moves where I could have done it in 1 move. What I've done is I've now developed all 4 of my minor pieces, as well as the rook on b1 for a bonus, and black's only developed 3 minor pieces, and okay, has castled, but I'll castle as well quite soon. And the bishop on c8 is going to have trouble going anywhere. So, and I've got a slight space advantage in this kind of transposed Maroczy bind. So I was feeling fairly confident at this point, and I don't think that black is really helped by the exchange on d4, because then I'd either get the bishop on g7, or he'd have to block up with e5, after knight takes knight, bishop takes e5, and then he has a weak pawn on d6. So, although it's a small bonus, a small plus, I do consider the weaknesses around his king could be a big problem in the future if he takes off everything on d4. So knight e5, which is favoured by the computer, is played, and now I make quite a big mistake, B3 is, of course, sorry, C4 is under fire, so I need to protect it. And I think the best way of doing that is Queen E2. But instead I play B3. And the idea behind that is to set up a pawn chain on A2, B3, C4. Keep my queen on the D file, so it's protecting the knight on D4. And it just lets my pieces develop better, and also it takes off one of the pieces from the long diagonal A1 to H8, so his bishop will hopefully have nothing to bite down on. So I thought this was good, but what I missed, and luckily my opponent did as well, is the move knight G4, which is quite thematic. The reason I think he missed it was because normally, rather than running around so much with the knights, black will have a knight on f6, and if white plays bishop e3 early, black can then go from f6 to g4. So moving from e5, that lovely central square, to the side with g4 is quite an unnatural looking move, but it's pretty strong here. The computer claims my best move is either queen e2 or castles, but what I was planning in the game could be a disaster, because I'd seen it and I thought bishop c1, but then knight e6, and I can't take the knight because then he has the intermediary move bishop takes c3 check, winning a piece. After I block the check with my bishop, he can then take off bishops and then capture the knight on e6. So here the best move for me is knight d to e2, and after a move like bishop d7, castles, bishop c6, black's developed all his pieces and they're in quite good dominating positions. My bishop on c1 is now undeveloped, so I'm behind in development, and he has a lot of control of those dark squares with the bishop on g7. My plan is to play bishop b2 and then knight d5, trying to contest the dark squares, but I still feel that black is okay here. Black's doing well. Luckily he didn't play this. Going back, instead he actually tried to what I call hack me with a5. So I think the idea behind this is that he's got the pawn on d6, which can't really move at the moment. So disregarding that pawn, he has 2 pawns on the queen side, and I've got 3 on the queen side. So he's trying to do a minority attack. If he tries chucking up the pawns on the king side, it might leave his king a bit weak, and I'm going to castle anyway. So there isn't really a central attack he can do. The king side doesn't look that safe, so therefore the queen side is the place to start the battle. I now castle, and he could still play knight g4 here, but with not so much of an impact. But instead he missed a tactic with a4, and what do I play here? Yeah, I can just take it with knight takes. Why did it take with the pawn? That would mess up my structure. And I think he'd thought that he could take the pawn with the knight, which is sometimes seen in queen's pawn openings. And then if I took back, he would then take my knight with the rook. Can you see what the problem in this plan is? Yeah, for those of you who spotted it, great. If knight takes pawn, pawn takes knight, rook takes knight, my queen is on the rook, so I'd win a rook. And that'd be great. I'd be the only one happy with that arrangement. So here he had a choice between either just accepting he lost a pawn, and then probably getting ground down in a long fight in the middle game. But instead, he went for dynamism, which I applaud. I like activity. So he actually sacked the exchange, and I have to take it. And then he got the pawn back with knight takes c4. So Here, I think the idea is that he's the exchange down in terms of material, but the knight on c4 could be very useful. He still has the two bishops, so he's threatening knight takes e3, and then the two bishops against a rook and bishop might be okay. And I think the idea is also that his pawn on b7 is restraining both my pawns on a2 and a4. So, in effect, he's a pawn up, as he has 5 against 4 on the king side. So those are the pluses for black. On the negative side, I'm the exchange up, so I just need to use my pieces effectively. Bishop c1, I want to keep the two bishops. Knight a6, so the knight's improving itself. Queen d3, knight e5, queen c2, and then knight c5. So after a little manoeuvring, it looks like he's doing quite well with his two knights on dark squares, hitting lots of light squares. So I decide to dislodge them with f4, gaining a bit of space. Knight e to d3. So I was a bit dubious about this move, because even though it looks like a so-called octopus knight in white's half of the board and controlling 8 squares, the thing is, it's a little bit sort of underprotected. Only the knight on c5 is preventing me from taking that knight. So I need to also defend the d4 knight, as his bishop is now attacking it. So I play bishop e3, queen a5, and now rook f to d1. So my plan is to take the knight, and after he recaptures, I'll take the second knight. So I'll have given up 2 pieces, the rook for 2 pieces, and that will leave me just a piece up in this sort of late middle game, and I should be able to win that. So knight b4, and now just pin to win, so queen d2, pinning against the queen. And what is wrong with knight c6? Why is knight c6 a bad move? Well, for those of you who've spotted it, very good. This is a Zwischenzug, an interposery move. After knight takes c6, the black queen's undefended. So queen takes queen, and remember, the game isn't just a game of drafts. I don't need to recapture the queen yet. I can play knight takes e7 check, king h8, and then take the queen. And now I'm a piece up, because I took his knight, but he couldn't take mine due to the check. So that's what's wrong with knight c6. So instead, he plays bishop g4, which is quite a clever way of avoiding losing a piece, as if I took on b4, he could then take on d1, and I would actually lose the exchange or more in this position. So rook d to c1, and now he plays knight c to d3, protecting his other knight. And again, the knight on d3 is somewhat underprotected. Only the knight on b4 is protecting the other knight, and it's pinned as well. So I don't play the most accurate move here. I try attacking the knight on d3 with rook c3, but there's an even stronger move, rook c4. So again, my plan is just to take on b4 and get 2 pieces for my rook. And the best move I could find was rook a8 and then bishop f1. So I'm now threatening to just take the knight on d3 for just winning a piece. b5, knight takes, bishop e6. And now I can't be bothered to calculate loads of tactics. I will just execute my plan and go a piece up. And I don't really mind about the a2 pawn dropping. The rook going to b8 looks like quite a good move. So I should win this quite easily, being a piece up. So going back, near the end of the game already, I play rook c3, which isn't as strong, and knight c5 can be played because the rook on c3 cuts off the line of the queen to the knight on b4 and queen on a5. So now I play rook c4, e5. So he's trying to meet threat for threat. And here, I generally, in the first game of the tournament, there are 3 games on the Saturday, I try and just play simple chess and win my games quickly, not calculate too much, because I'm going to have another 2 games that day, so I don't want to tire myself out. Just it's like a race, just pace yourself. You don't need to sprint all the way to the finish. And you can't in a marathon. So instead of knight c2, which would just win outright, I play knight b3. And this pretty much forces knight takes b3. And now he would have knight c6, which would prevent him losing a piece. So instead of rook takes b3, I repair the pawn structure with a takes, knight c6. And now when you're winning, just swap. Queen takes, knight takes, and improve your piece with rook c7. So again, what's good is that I've got the 2 bishops still against, so I'm basically rook against knight. And it's much easier to play with bishops. If I had a knight instead of one of my bishops, it might be just a little harder for me to play, even though a computer's evaluation wouldn't really change, as it's approaching the endgame with a very open position. It can be harder to play with a knight. So I'm very happy here. And he plays bishop e6. And now I see a little tactic and I just go for it with bishop b6, knight takes b3. And again, I'm deflecting his piece away. Look at the knight. What's defending it? Yeah, the bishop. So the bishop can't actually move at all here. If it went to d5, I could clearly take it. And if it went to c4, I could take it with my rook. So I just want to get the bishop off the line of the knight with f5. And here he plays a nice move that doesn't lose a piece with knight d2, rook d1, and knight c4. So here he's threatening a piece in order to protect himself. And here, even though there's very complicated tactics with the move like bishop f2, then knight b2, so on. But I just saw a very easy way to win the game with f takes e6. And what do you play after knight takes the bishop on b6? Yeah, even though it's opposite coloured bishops, I will win easily with e7. And I like to call them monsters. A pawn on the 7th rank is a monster. So it's worth about the same as a piece. So effectively, I am a rook up. And after rook e8, rook takes d6, and my opponent resigned. Because when the knight moves away, I have rook d8. And there's actually a very funny tactic with the only move that doesn't, where rook d8 doesn't work, is knight a8. So if I play rook d8, there's knight takes rook, protecting his rook. And here, again, as I've said, I don't want to go for a very long game. I just want to win fast. So rook c8 is a very fun way to win. If knight to c7, I'll just win the knight. And if rook takes, I have rook check, rook takes, queen check, and then I'll take the knight. So I'll be a queen up, and then he can resign at any point here, and I can win. So that was my first game against Ben Simpson, who put up a bit of a fight there. So I was on 1 out of 1, And then my second game of the tournament, I was now black, and my opponent played the rather unusual move, g3. This is Colin Jezierski, who is about 180 ECF and I think 1980 FIDE. But again, he has been known to play above that, and my FIDE is, I think, 2090. So I'm about 100 points higher than him. And the move g3 is just, it's like the red flag to a bull. I just don't think this is a very principled move, so I immediately try and prove black is actually better. So I play knight f6, which is generally my response to anything white plays. Bishop g2, and e5. So I'm trying to occupy the center early. And now he played c4. So he's transposed it into an English, which is, again, this is what I play. But in my head, I was thinking, I'm not going to let you get away with this. You played g3 at move 1. So I was a bit stuck in the past and thinking that this is just the wrong move order and I should be able to punish him for it. So I played the rather shocking h5. So I'm trying desperately to hack him on the king side. And here I think a move like h4 is just fine for white. It's okay for black as well. I could then play g6 and bishop g7. And we'd basically have a reverse Sicilian just with the moves h4 and h5 inserted. But instead he plays d4. So he in turn tries to punish me for making the unnatural looking move h5, and he decides to open up the center. I take, because I think that's the most challenging move I have. Queen takes, because otherwise I'd have c5 protecting my pawn. And now I play knight c6. So a very natural move, just attacking the queen and developing. Here though, I was thinking that he might take my knight on c6, and I would recapture with the b pawn because I'd want the queens to stay on so I could try and attack him. But I do think that bishop takes c6, while it would damage my pawn structure, it isn't really worth it. It does weaken the king side quite a lot. So his move is maybe not the best though. Queen d1 might just be the best move, putting the queen out of harm's way. Queen h4 is worth considering, and after bishop e7 there's bishop g5. But I do feel the queen is what we might call offside in that position. It's too far away from the edge of the board, so a move like knight b4 might be very strong. So queen d1 is what I think is best, but queen d3 is played. Now bishop c5, so I'm trying to be very active. Knight f3, which I applaud. I think that's the best move, easily, because I was planning knight e5, just taking more control of the center, attacking the c4 pawn as well as the queen, and planning on d6 to cement my knight on e5. So knight f3 prevents that, and again I feel that even though we've both developed 3 pieces, one of those 3 is his queen, so I still feel that I should be able to attack the queen and prove I have an advantage. So I opened the game up more with d5, and here he's faced with a choice. What could have happened is c takes, queen takes, knight takes, and after castling and perhaps a move like bishop g4, where I'm planning to castle queenside, I still feel that black might be a tiny bit better, but it's a fairly even game, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was just even. But I do like this position, so I would be perfectly comfortable having this as black. Alright, so he didn't take. Instead, he played the move bishop g5. pinning my knight, and making use of the fact I've played h5, so I can't kick the bishop by playing h6. So here, knight b4, so I'm going for knight c2 check. Queen d1 now is played. And here I actually go for a crazy tactical sequence with bishop takes f2 check. So I'll let you have a look at this position for a few seconds. Well, if I was white, I'd have taken, because that's the challenge to black's idea. If I just play king f1, then I have allowed black to win a pawn for nothing. So that would have been my response, my psychological way of looking at it. But let's see what happens if black does have his bishop taken by the king. This is not what was played, but it's a lot of fun. King takes f2, and the idea behind it was knight e4 check, attacking the bishop on g5. King f1, knight takes, queen a4, attacking the knight, knight c6, pawn takes d5, queen takes d5, knight takes g5. There's lots of pieces coming off here. Queen takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. So I'd seen it up to about this point, and I had found the move which I think is the only move that prevents black from just losing on the spot. Can you find it? Yeah, king e7. And if queen takes the rook, then I have the discovered attack, bishop h3 check, hitting the queen with my rook on h8. So he would be forced to play queen g2, and then I could perhaps needle him a bit with queen f6 check would be very good here. So actually, yeah, that's an improvement. Queen f6 check. King has to move to say g1. Then I take the queen. King takes, and then queen takes b2. But there's also even stronger, I think. If king g1 is played, I also have queen d4 check, and then if e3 is played, it doesn't make any difference. Queen takes. The only move I can really find is king f1, because if queen f2, queen c1 check will be checkmate. So king f1, then queen c1. I'm determined not to take his queen, aren't I? Queen f2, queen takes b2, and then I win the queen for free with the bishop, and I'm on both his rooks, so I'll be completely winning here. So that was the tactical resource king e7, but the far better move that white can play is king g2, and now after bishop d7, queen e4, bishop e6, knight c3, we now have a real game. There's an equal amount of material, amazingly, in this position, and lots of open files and semi-open files for the rooks, so plenty of activity there. Both our kings aren't really that safe, but the only slight advantage that black may have is that after rook hd8, and white could then play rook hd1, I feel that the bishop might be slightly better than the knight in the endgame because it's a very open position with activity on both wings. So the bishop as a long-range piece should perform better than the knight. But this is only speculation. We don't know how the game is going to go from here. So it was worth looking at this sequence, and it's utterly crazy looking, which is a kind of position I like. But instead, he didn't take the bishop. He played king f1, ruining the tactics. So I played bishop c5, retreating and defending the knight on b4 in view of queen a4 check. Now a3, knight c6, and knight c3 is played. So here I was still trying to develop, actually. I was trying to be principled, believe it or not. And I played a move which is inaccurate. I played bishop e6. Developing the bishop, but there is a downside to it. Can you see what white could have played in this position? Yeah, there's bishop takes knight, and then after I capture with the queen, pawn takes, forking the bishop and knight, and then castle queenside. And I think this is fairly drawish, actually. After queen b3, knight d4, queen c4, bishop b6, pawn takes bishop. And here, after knight f5, threatening knight e3 check, I think the best response is queen e4. And then knight takes e3 check, knight e3 check, king f2, and I could simply get a draw by repetition with knight c2 check, king f1, knight e3. But again, if I wanted to go for something crazy, which I generally do, there's rook d4, queen takes knight, rook d8, queen takes bishop, a takes, e takes f7. So here it's 3 pieces for a queen, and this is again a mad looking position, and I honestly do not know who is better here. It's white isn't winning by a pawn because I have rook h to f8 and then taking on f7. So again, I don't know what you would think about this position. Maybe black is better, maybe white's better. All I know is it's going to be a very complicated game from here. Where if white, I think what I'll say is that if white can coordinate his forces effectively, then the power of the 3 pieces combined should be able to overwhelm the queen. But having said that, it's incredibly hard to coordinate your pieces this well, and the queen can often fork lots of pawns and pieces. So it's much easier to play with the queen. Anyway, going back, that isn't what was played, but it could have been a lot of fun. Instead, my opponent went for c takes d5. I think with the idea that if I played bishop takes d5, then bishop takes knight would win a piece. But instead, again, I keep the game crazy with knight takes d5. So I'm allowing the queen to come off. Not a big deal. Who needs the queen, right? The boring line is one you're going to see where he just plays knight takes knight, and I recapture with the queen, preventing the queen's coming off. But if we look at bishop takes knight, the bishop takes queen, I mean, then the winning move is knight e3 check, and if king e1 needs to be played, really, because if king f2 or g1, the knight can take the queen for free. But here, instead of just routinely capturing the queen, I can instead play knight takes g2, check, king d2, rook takes bishop check, skewering the queen, king c1, rook takes queen, rook takes, knight a5. And here, knight b3 is practically winning on the spot. And it's very hard for white to really combat this idea. If a move like king b1 is played, then the rook on a1 is just trapped pretty much indefinitely. So b4 is the best chance. And now knight b3 check, king b2, knight takes a1, pawn takes bishop, and the knight can escape with knight b3. So I'm up by a piece, as well as being a pawn up as well. So that would be completely winning for me. Again, heading back to the game, my opponent did not do this. He played knight takes d5, queen takes, and here I was surprised. I think because black is so much more coordinated and better developed, as well as the black king being able to castle, I would have traded queens as white, just to get rid of any attack. And that even though I'd be a pawn down, there might be a chance of eking out a draw, but queen c2 was played, and this allows bishop f5. And then the surprising move, e4. So again, I don't want to trade pieces with queen takes, and that would probably be a big mistake after either queen takes queen or queen takes c5. So I take with the bishop, rook e1 is played, so white's getting some activity, pinning me. So f5 and knight d2. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces on my bishop, and I only have 2 pieces on it. So I can't sufficiently protect the e4 square. Instead, though, I play a move in keeping with the idea of developing. What would you play as black? Yeah, castle kingside. And now, after knight takes e4, f takes e4 check. So I'm now on the bishop on g5, and here I thought he was going to resign because of the fact he can't protect the bishop. But I missed bishop f4, and I think because that was such a surprising move, I failed completely to find a good follow-up. g5 is perfectly good for black, attacking the pinned piece and winning. But I played queen d3 check, queen takes, pawn takes, and I thought I was a piece up. I was a bit stupid here. I somehow forgot to count the bishop on g2. So now white got some play here, and then got out of the pin with king g2. So the material is actually, I'm 2 pawns up, so I'm not down on material or anything. But he has the 2 bishops, and he has quite a lot of activity now. So I played g5, giving up a pawn. So the idea is if bishop takes g5, I have rook f2, trying to, again, activate pieces and put my rook on the 7th. So instead he plays bishop takes c6. And I think he was counting on me playing pawn takes c6, keeping the bishops on the same colour, because often in the endgame it's very hard to win with bishops of opposite colours. But I did do this, pawn takes f4. So yeah, we have opposite coloured bishops. Because with rooks on the board, the side with the attack wins if you keep the rooks on and have some sort of lasting initiative. And the move I thought he was going to play, which he didn't, was bishop f3, going for sort of a big fortress with white, trying to just nullify my attack and be able to blockade. But after bishop e3, I'm going to play d2, and my pawn is so close to promotion that even though he could blockade d1 for a while, his pieces will be so passive that I could even win just by throwing up my queenside pawns and creating another passed pawn. So g takes, rook g8, king h3, and bishop takes f4. And I'd analysed this far, and I was certain I was winning. I don't know what the computer would recommend in this position, but I feel that my pieces are good enough, and my pawn on d3 will be enough of a monster for me to successfully convert this to a win. But this didn't happen. He instead played rook e5, and I don't mind losing a pawn. Pawn takes, and he does the intermediary Zwischenzug rook h5 check, king g7, and now rook takes c5. So can you see the winning move for black here? Yeah, f3 check. Don't take. I have two monster pawns. Two is better than one. So king f2 to blockade. And here I'm only a pawn up, but that doesn't really matter so much. I could just take off the pawn on a7. It wouldn't matter a jot, because again, it's all about initiative in double rook endgames. Whoever has the attack wins generally. So I developed the last piece with rook a to e8. Rook e2 is coming. And I just can't see any way for white to defend. So we played on a couple of moves. Rook d1. And I give up one of my monster pawns to be able to promote the other one. Rook e2 check. King f2, f1. Rook takes h2. Rook takes d3. And now there's only one move that wins for black. What is it? Well, other moves, I wouldn't say they don't win, but they make it so much harder, and black, according to a computer analysis, only has a tiny advantage. And I probably wouldn't have been able to see over the board how black would win. So the only move that is concretely won is f2. When you have a passed pawn, push it. So the threat that white cannot meet is rook h1 check, king e2, and then f1 queen. So he threw in a spite check, as we call them. When you've lost, but you may as well just throw in a check to prolong the game. And here I just move to a square where he can't check me at all. Where can I move to? Well, if you said g6, then no, rook takes c6, and then there's a long series of checks that I have to try and run away from, and that's never very fun. So just king h8. And he can't check me on the h-file due to my rook, and of course he can't check me on the 8th rank due to the other rook. So here he did resign the game. So I was feeling pretty happy now. I was on 2 out of 2, heading into the third round of the night, where a lot of players take half-point buys because they're feeling quite knackered. So this was my chance to win the third game and take the lead in the tournament. So I was white against Marek Vlcek, who is a bit underrated in my opinion. He's 1980 again, I think, or 1981, and I think about 175 ECF, but has been known to beat players who are 200 ECF. So at least I think so anyway. So I was cautious going into this game, And I played c4 and knight f6. Again, I played g3. And here he played e5. So he's a bit like the game I've just shown you. He's trying to challenge me early. So bishop g2 and c6. And I never really liked this line too much, but my opinion may have changed from this game. Here, black is attempting to set up the pawn structure d5 and e4 sometimes. So it's a long 4-pawn chain of b7 to e4, and it completely shuts down my bishop on g2. So I strike in the centre first with d4, and we go into the main line with bishop b4 check, bishop d2, so I don't want this to turn into some sort of Nimzo-Indian with knight c3. I want to keep this in the lines of the English. And queen e7 is a move that is not so hot, but can be played due to pawn takes, pawn, bishop takes, bishop, check, queen takes bishop, queen e5, and then I have moves like knight f3 gaining tempos against his queen. So he took, queen takes, pawn takes, queen takes. So I've got a slightly better control of the centre because of the presence of the queen. And the move that black is now desperately trying to play with his pawn is what? What's black trying to play? Yeah, d5 is the move. However, if he plays it at this exact moment, I will be able to create an isolated queen's pawn, which will almost certainly favour me. d5, pawn takes, knight takes, isn't so good because of queen takes g7, so he'd have to take with the pawn. And then I could play a move like knight c3 attacking the pawn, or I could play, perhaps slightly better, e3, and then play knight g1 to e2, and then blockade the pawn on d4. So I'd be pretty happy with this position if he played d5. Instead, castles, perfectly logical. Knight c3, now just preventing d5 outright. Knight a6. So this is a very clever move. If he plays d6, then he's just what's the word? He's sort of losing a tempo because he's planning on playing d5. And while the pawn is on d6, it's incredibly weak because there's no pawn protecting it. So I could play rook d1. So he doesn't want to move the pawns on c6 or d7 yet. So how to develop? Well, knight a6, and then the knight can either come to c7 or to b4, and that would control the d5 square. So it's just an interesting way of developing the knight. I now play e4, so it's going into a sort of like an English Botvinnik, as well as a Maroczy bind position. And again, e4 is controlling d5. I'm trying my best to prevent him playing d5, gaining activity. Rook e8, pinning the pawn, and now the aforementioned knight ge2. So it controls d4, it unpins the pawn, and I could even play knight f4 at some point, again hitting d5. Knight b4 is now played, and I can't play a3 due to knight c2 check, a royal fork or a family fork, hitting the rook, the queen, and the king all at once. So what do you think I played as white to prevent knight c2 check? Well, activity is the order of the day, castle queenside. So that prevents knight c2 check, and it adds an extra piece onto the d file, the rook. So I'm doing my utmost to prevent d5 again, and I have two pawns, a knight, a bishop, a rook, and a queen, all on d5. So I have 6 pieces controlling that square. So it's going to be practically impossible for him to play d5 now. Queen a5. And here I think I made a very, not a huge mistake, but definitely not a good move. I think I should just play a5. So if sorry, a3 I meant. If I play a3, the knight has to move back to a6. f4 was my plan, but I was slightly concerned about knight c5. Again, it's threatening the fork, knight b3 check, so, watch out. And there's also a little bit of pressure against e4. He has 3 pieces attacking it, and I have only 3 defending it. So if he gets one more piece onto it, or if I move one piece away, he'll get the e4 pawn. But this is just a silly thing to be afraid of, because I have a move like king b1, just not doing anything extravagant or incredibly complicated, just moving the king away. And then maybe knight e6, queen d2, knight g4 threatening knight f2, and then a simple maybe knight d4. And here I've still got a huge advantage. He still can't play d5, which therefore means he can't move the bishop on c8, and the rook on a8 is a virtual prisoner. So I'm effectively 2 pieces up at the moment because his 2 pieces can't move. So I was kicking myself after I didn't play the simple a3. Again, I was if you see a line that you're afraid of for no reason, sometimes the word or phrase is ghost. So I was afraid of ghosts. They weren't really real, but the threats weren't real, but they appeared that way. So f4 was played, and I'm planning e5, and that way it will prevent d5 via the en passant capture. So c5 was now played, which I missed. I played queen g1 because I want to stay on the c5 pawn, as I'd seen that knight takes a2, knight takes a2, queen takes a2, and queen takes c5. I thought this was okay for me at the time, as I'm not losing material, but I missed knight takes e4, and here I take with the bishop, and he now takes with the rook. So again, I'm ahead on development, but there's a very nasty threat of rook takes c4 check. And I was planning on playing knight c3 because I thought that if he takes with the queen on c4, I have knight takes rook, queen takes queen, and then knight takes queen. So I'll win a rook. Hooray! Peace up. What's wrong with that idea? Yeah, queen takes pawn, and then I can't move my knight because it's pinned, so I would just lose a pawn here. Rook takes c4 is less conclusive because rook h e1 threatens checkmate, so no need to get into heavy tactics. I think it would actually be winning for me. So, but queen takes c4 is winning for black. I had to alter my plan here and play knight d4, blocking the rook. And now, again, the computer evaluation gives this as better for black after d6, releasing the bishop. But it's still difficult to play for black because the bishop and rook haven't yet been developed. And my knight on d4 is controlling lots of light squares. So I'm still in with a shout here of perhaps drawing or winning. I play queen d5 to protect c4, as queen takes d6, queen takes c4, gives black lots of activity, which I do not want. So rook e8, and then I think I can use the word blunder. Rook h e1. And this move is absolutely terrible, because can you see what black should have played in this position, which I think just wins on the spot? Well, remember how I said the bishop and rook on a8 were virtual prisoners? Well, you want to release your prisoners so they can fight for you in this battle. Bishop g4, hitting my rook and connecting your own rooks. And I think I'm just lost here. I can't see anything that's good for me. Rook takes check. Rook takes. Rook d2. Rook e1 check. Queen c2. Sorry, king c2. And maybe just a simple move like h5 to create luft or air for your king, so there's no back rank checkmates. And black is a pawn up, has lots of threats on the table here, and the bishop is probably eventually going to surpass the knight in terms of usefulness. And also my king is incredibly weak and open to attack. So I think this would have just been winning. I'd have played on because that's just what I do. I don't generally resign for a long time. But I would be very, very afraid here. I generally think I was losing by quite a lot. So that's what he should have played after rook h e1. But instead, he just took. I recaptured. And again, bishop g4 it's not as useful as it is in the game, but it's still a move that develops and lets the pieces out. So while it would lose the b7 pawn, it would at least there'd be a very interesting game happening. But he played queen a1 check, king d2, protecting the rook, queen takes b2. After king d3, I'm still threatening checkmate. So again, bishop g4, very, very sensible. It would solve most problems. Bishop d7's also good. But he checks me again. Maybe he was going for a draw. I'm not quite sure here. King c2, queen a4 check, king c3. And now, again, the best move is probably just bishop d7. After rook e7, threatening mate, I could, after rook f8, I could go for the pawn on b7. And this is probably drawn. Black might be a little bit better, but I think white's almost equalised here. And is only one pawn down, but with lots of activity. So, still not bad for black at all. But he checks me again on a3, and now I play a move which, while it doesn't win on the spot, it does cause black a lot of problems. I play knight b3, and black's only chance now is to just retreat the queen back to a4, protecting against rook e8 mate, and then allowing, again, bishop e6 could be played, so on, so on. Queen takes d6 is good for me, and then bishop e6 lets black back into the game. So it's probably drawish here. I could play knight d4, just going back to the starting position, and then he could repeat moves or play bishop d7, and then again we'd have that line where there's still a bit of activity for both sides, but white could probably draw. So queen a4 is definitely good, but instead he played bishop e6, and this is unfortunately a huge blunder, because what does white play here to win? Yeah, queen takes b7, hitting the rook. And I think what he had thought was that rook c8 would hit c4, and then that would coordinate the bishop and rook to work very well together and create a winning attack. But what would white play here to win? Well, if you said rook takes e6, that way you'd win a piece. Good, but it's not the best move. Queen takes c8 check. And after bishop takes, rook e8 mate. So pretty, being a material down, but still winning. So he can't play rook c8. Instead, he had to be content with rook e8. And now, what's the winning move? Okay, pencils down. It's rook a1, winning the queen. And, you know, to be fair to him, he did play on a little. He played bishop c8. So here, I still need to be a little bit careful. If I just take the bishop with queen takes bishop and expect him to recapture and then I go a piece up, I'm in for a rude awakening. After queen takes bishop, he can counter-sack with queen takes rook check, and I'll be down the exchange. And here, there's queen b8 and queen c6, which still technically, I think, win for white. But I didn't want to calculate loads of tactics because he'd have rook e3 check. So instead, just queen f3. I don't need to do anything spectacular. I'm winning the queen. So bishop g4 is now played. And I realised that he'd caused me a few problems with moves like if I play queen f2, he has rook e2, and so on. It gets annoying. So I took the bishop. Rook e3, king d2, and I'm threatening queen c8 mate. So he has to keep checking me. Queen b2, king takes rook, queen takes knight check. So I'm now rook up, and again I'm still threatening queen c8 mate. So king f2. And now, if he wanted to really give it a try and win or draw, he'd play f5. Because if I take, yeah, let's say f5. Should I take the pawn? No, not in the slightest. If I do, then there's queen b2 check, and queen c8 is no longer checkmate. So I would just lose the rook advantage. And if I'm honest, it's probably drawn. I would play on and try and win it, as I'd go a pawn up after. Oh, sorry, king f3. After queen e6, he has to play king f8, queen takes d6 check. But these sort of positions are very hard for either side to win, and I wouldn't be that confident I could win it. Maybe I can, but it's still tricky. Instead, though, he plays queen b2 check, queen e2, so now threatening queen e8 mate, queen e3 d4 check, and king g2. So there are no more checks. h6, and I just want to simply swap off. I don't want to go another 20 moves of just winning pawns. So rook d1, queen c5, queen e8, king h7, queen takes f7, a5, trying to do something, queen d5, so going for the swap. And now, after queen e3, how do I swap queens? Yeah, queen d3 check. So he has to take. And here he did resign. So after the first day, after Saturday that's just gone, I was on 3 out of 3. And heading into the Sunday, half a point ahead of 2 people on 2.5 out of 3. And the 2 games I played yesterday, I will show you in the next video. So comment, like, subscribe, and hope you enjoyed it. All right, bye.